If this keeps happening, it's going to be longer than. All right. And the objection has been overruled, and welcome back. And glad to see everybody safe and sound. Mr. Chambliss, you may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. Unfortunately, I forgot all the terms of the last question, so I'd request that the reporter read it back, please.
Question, now hypothetically assuming those are the toxicological results that were obtained when the blood and urine and the stomach contents of Julie Jensen were tested for the presence of ethylene glycol, would you have an opinion as to the cause of Julie Jensen's death when you take into consideration the soft tissue injury that you discovered along the anterior portion of the left chest wall, when you consider the manner in which the face appears to be mashed into the pillow, and when you consider the statement of an admitted jailhouse informant that Mark Jensen indicates that he had poisoned Julie, that she was actually improving on December 3rd, that he panicked, so he sat on her, shoved her face into the pillow and suffocated her, do you have an opinion as you sit here right now, doctor, to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to the cause of death and the manner of death given those hypothetical, factual situations, circumstances?
Yes. From the information provided with the toxicology studies, with the investigative information that's provided there, the toxicology findings do not suggest an immediate cause of death, but the information provided in the investigation does give an immediate cause of death. The immediate cause of death would be smothering. Ethylene glycol would not be the cause of death, the acute cause of death, because the levels present in the bloodstream are not at a level that I consider to be an immediate cause of death.
Now, doctor, you have examined the bodies of persons who've committed suicide by taking one toxin or another in the past, have you not?
Yes, I have.
And have you ever examined the body of a person who was poisoned in a homicide before?
No.
Well, do you have any opinion concerning the level of toxins, the ethylene glycol that was in Julie Jensen's system, considering the oxalic acid crystals in her kidneys and the amount of ethylene glycol that was in her stomach, the amount of ethylene glycol that was in her blood, and the amount of ethylene glycol that was in her urine? Do you have any insights with respect to whether that amount or that quantity of ethylene glycol is more consistent with a suicide or with a homicide?
It's more consistent with a homicide.
And why is that?
The level of ethylene glycol in the bloodstream, which is the particular number that we look for that would bring about the cause of death, should be very high in a person who's committed suicide. Because that's an acute situation of someone ingesting the particular toxin, and it should raise to a very high level enough to cause an immediate death. In this case, we have a very low level of ethylene glycol. We have a very high level in the gastric contents. We also have a high level in the urine. So the fluid that we're looking for and the level that we're looking for should be in the blood, and we have a low level in the bloodstream, which takes it out of the manner of death of suicide for me.
Thank you, Dr. Chambliss. I have no further questions.
Dr. Chambliss, when I asked you some questions about when was the last time you expected that she urinated, you said it depends on a whole lot of circumstances, right?
That's correct.
But you think you have enough circumstances here based on that hypothetical question to give an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
Utilizing toxicology levels plus investigative information.
What do you know about the source of that information that Mark Jensen supposedly confessed? Who is that witness? What do you know about him?
I don't know anything about that individual. I have to place my trust in the investigators who bring the information to me.
Who are you trusting?
I have to bring, as I mentioned before, I have to trust the investigators who do the work for me.
What investigator told you he was telling the truth?
I was just responding to the hypothetical that he presented to me.
The hypothetical didn't say he was telling the truth, did it?
You're correct. He didn't say he was telling the truth.
How many convictions would a person have to have before you wouldn't believe him in a hypothetical situation?
I go on the investigation, I go on the autopsy findings, and I put together my experience with all those items, and I make a judgment call. And the judgment call, if I can finish, and the judgment call that I make is based upon those particular issues. All three of those particular findings weigh heavily as far as how I come to a judgment on cause of death and manner of death.
Okay. Reasonable degree of medical certainty. You don't come to that kind of conclusion lightly, do you?
I do not.
And in your initial report, right here, that's been marked as S7, I think, you weren't able to come up with cause of death, right?
It's a preliminary autopsy report.
Dr. Chambliss, you weren't able to come up with a cause of death, correct?
That's correct.
And in this autopsy, you had the information about some hemorrhage in the rib area, correct?
That's correct.
You had the information about some petechiae in the lung area, right?
That's correct.
You had examined the face and the nose, right?
That's correct.
And based on those examinations, you had an undetermined cause of death, correct?
Pending further studies is what the cause of death said in this case.
Which means that it's undetermined by you.
No, it does not mean it's undetermined. It means it requires further investigation and toxicology to come up with a cause and manner of death. That's what pending further studies means.
And that further investigation, until you do it, you can't come up with an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty. True?
That's correct.
Now, when you do an investigation, the credibility of a witness matters, right?
Yes, it does.
And who is telling you that this witness is credible? What do you know about the witness?
I am just responding to the information provided to me. I don't know this individual.
We'll assume that the individual is a liar. Then what is, then do you have an opinion?
Objection.
A reasonable degree of medical certainty?
Objection, Your Honor. It's not the function of one witness to judge the credibility of another. That's why we have a jury.
Well, but except that you, in your hypothetical, posited the assumption that that a witness had informed thus and so, and the doctor had indicated that based upon that as one of his considerations that the cause of death was as was indicated, and now he's being asked to not only, well, he's being asked to withdraw that from the considerations and make a conclusion without it. That's a pretty long way of saying it, but
I didn't know this as well.
well, I think that and I wish I could recall exactly what the structure of the former question was, but I have to say your question was worded in such a way that it didn't really, I don't think, it didn't really ask him to assume the truth of what the prisoner was saying. It rather asked him to assume that the prisoner was claiming thus and so, which is a little bit different. So I do think that Mr. Albee, either way, is entitled to get the doctor's viewpoint if that particular proposition were withdrawn from the syllogism.
Does that mean the objection is overruled, Your Honor? Is that okay? Thank you.
Could you repeat your question for me so I know answer it properly?
The last question was, well, assume that the individual is a liar, then what is, then do you have an opinion?
As to which one? I'm not sure which direction. Cause of death or manner of death?
As to, well, what is your cause? What's your cause of death?
As I mentioned here, I don't...
What is your cause of death, please?
Undetermined.
No. What is your cause of death under the...
Undetermined. You can have a cause of death is undetermined.
And the manner of death you're saying is homicide?
No, if you're asking me right now what my cause of death would be, it'd be undetermined. My manner of death would also be undetermined.
That is, in this particular case we have right now, Julie Jensen, you don't have a cause of death, right?
I don't have a cause of death without other information,
You don't have a cause of death, you don't have a manner of death, right?
or without other information.
Is that a yes?
Yes,
And then you were given a hypothetical, and you said you could give an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty under that hypothetical, right?
yes,
Now, if in that hypothetical, you assume that the person providing the information about Mark Jensen is a liar, then do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
yes,
Then what is that?
it's undetermined.
And you've done now you've given some opinions now about ethylene glycol poisoning, right?
Yes,
You've done how many cases in your entire life with ethylene glycol poisoning?
2 cases.
Well, you weren't sure if you remembered the other one, right?
That's correct. I wasn't aware of the particulars of the second case.
All right, so you really have only done one.
That's correct.
And when was that?
In the time when I was at the Cook County Medical Examiner's Office.
The early 1990s?
It would have been 84 through 91.
So probably in the 80s?
Yes.
And you haven't done any research on ethylene glycol?
No.
You don't do any additional research before giving an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
I consult with the forensic toxicologist on a regular basis, actually
Okay.
2 or 3 times a week with a regular toxicologist to discuss cases.
Okay.
That's my research.
Okay. And did you consult with that toxicologist before giving your opinion to that hypothetical to a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
Not in this particular case, no. Not right here, no.
Right. You haven't done a case in 20 years. You haven't done any research. You didn't consult any toxicologist, but you're just going to go give your opinion about ethylene glycol, right?
No, but I know a level in which ethylene glycol should be toxic. You could have a minimal level of 100 ml of ethylene glycol ingestion to bring about death. I know that.
Well, how much did Julie Jensen consume?
I can't tell you that. I just know this is a very low level in her bloodstream.
Well, when you consume ethylene glycol, the body metabolizes it, right?
That's correct.
There's an absorption period where it rises, correct?
That's correct.
And then an elimination period where it decreases.
That's correct.
And are you telling me that at the end of the stage, someone can't die, for example, from the ethylene glycol by virtue of hypocalcemia, for example?
I'm not aware of any case of that, so I can't say.
Well, you're not aware because you haven't studied ethylene glycol in 20 years.
Objection. Counsel's arguing with the witness, Your Honor.
There are 3 phases of ethylene glycol intoxication, if you'd like to know. I have researched the topic.
I know that I could go on Wikipedia and find the 3 phases of ethylene glycol poisoning. What I'm asking about is, can hypocalcemia result at an end stage after consumption of ethylene glycol?
I don't know.
Can you have a heart arrhythmia
Yes.
and your blood level could be quite low, correct?
It could be, yes.
Now, the blood level in this case of 0.5 or 55 micrograms per deciliter, is that right?
Yes.
Now, you know that Dr. Maureen Lavin said that that was the cause of death, even though that was the level in the blood, right?
Yes.
And you know that Dr. Long said that that was the cause of death. He's the toxicologist who did the work. He said it was the cause of death was ethylene glycol, even though there were only 55 micrograms per deciliter in the blood, right?
Yes.
And do you know something they don't know, where you give the opinion that the death couldn't be from ethylene glycol based on that blood level?
A cause of death can change depending on information provided on a case. The problem is people don't want to make the change.
You gave an opinion that based on the blood level, you could not say that Julie Jensen died from ethylene glycol poisoning, right?
Exactly.
Okay. That information has been constant since 2002, that she's,
Assuming so, yes.
and Dr. Long found the same thing, right?
I'm not sure what Dr. Long's cause of death is for this case.
All right. And just on the blood level, what do you know that they don't know? Oh, and I'm sorry, one more. Have you talked to Dr. Mainland about this case?
I don't know who that is.
She's the current Kenosha County Medical Examiner. And she will also testify to that she has said the same thing in the past. So what do you know that they don't know about blood levels of ethylene glycol? When you say that a person could not die from ethylene glycol with 55 micrograms per deciliter in their blood?
It's based on my experience. I don't know what they know.
What is that experience?
From my information of working with a forensic toxicologist. That's all I can work from.
When did you consult with your forensic toxicologist about ethylene glycol?
I didn't consult in this particular case.
When have you ever consulted with your forensic toxicologist about ethylene glycol?
When I was at the Cook County Medical Examiner's office.
Well, you keep saying your experience with the person you consult with 2 or 3 times a week. That experience doesn't do you any good if you don't talk about ethylene glycol. Would you agree?
In this particular case, my role was to do the autopsy. I didn't do the additional steps involved in this case. That was my only role.
I'm not concerned with your autopsy. I'm concerned with you giving an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty to a hypothetical question when you don't know hardly any facts. And I'm asking, how is it did you reach that opinion that somebody couldn't die of ethylene glycol poisoning with 55 micrograms per deciliter?
Again, it depends on the investigation. I'm taking the investigation. And the investigation that's given me, I'm going to rely on the investigation and go to a reasonable degree of medical certainty.
What is that? I've asked this before. I don't think I've gotten an answer. What is the investigation you are referring to? What do you know?
That she was not completely in a state where she was, first of all, she wasn't dead. And secondly, she wasn't dying quick enough. And there is information that's provided to me. I can't totally ignore information that's provided to me. If I ignore the information that's provided to me, I would place the cause of death in an undetermined category and the manner of death in an undetermined category, which says to me, I'm not quite sure of all the particulars on this case, and in that case, it still has a possibility of being a homicide, whether it's ethylene glycol or smothering.
Dr. Chambliss, you're here to give an objective opinion, was my understanding.
And I'm trying to do that.
I just want to talk about the blood result for a moment.
Okay.
Because your job is not, as you already said, is not to evaluate credibility of witnesses, right?
That's true.
You're supposed to be a scientist, right?
Sure.
I want you to look at the science, and you tell me, by looking at that toxicology, could Julie Jensen have died from ethylene glycol or not?
As you said, I didn't do the research on it, so I can't give an opinion properly on that case.
Okay, so your opinion that you gave to a reasonable degree of medical certainty is not based on the toxicology because you don't know enough about it. Is that fair to say?
Well, it's based on a low level in the bloodstream. And to me, that's a low level in the bloodstream. And a high level in the gastric contents, which means it didn't get absorbed. We got an acute ingestion that was not absorbed.
Acute ingestion at the time of death.
We do have something, a large amount in her stomach that was not absorbed over the course of time to elevate that into the bloodstream.
How much ethylene glycol is in the stomach?
3,940 micrograms. That's a very high level of ethylene glycol in the stomach.
How convert that to something that we all know?
If you have 660 mLs and you have 100 mLs of that, and you're taking 100 mLs and you're taking a very tiny aliquot of that particular fluid, of that 100 ml, and you're sending it through the machine, and you're coming out with a level of 3,940 micrograms per ml, you're having a very high peak on the gas chromatograph, which tells me normally there's a particular level that the toxicologists look at, And that's way, way above the level. I can't tell you in layman's terms an ounce I can't give it in that particular level because you're dealing with an aliquot that's very, very small.
Are you saying that you can't, it's impossible to determine how much is in the stomach?
I'm telling you, that's the amount from a very tiny thing. And that's the way I would answer that. It's best determined by the toxicologist.
Well, you didn't talk to a toxicologist, right?
That's correct.
That's a deficit in your information, true?
No, it's not a deficit in my understanding of numbers.
In your information.
Oh, in my information, the information is here.
Now, there were 660 milliliters in her stomach, right, of liquid.
That's correct.
How much of that is this large amount that you're talking about of ethylene glycol?
I took 100 mLs and submitted it to the lab. So it's out of that 100 ml.
You can quantify how much of a substance is in the stomach, true?
All I can say is the 100 ml is...
Dr. Chambliss?
I can't quantify that, is what I'm telling you. It's not something I can quantify. I can't give you a number of a tiny aliquot.
Dr. Chambliss, here's my question. Can you tell me how much total ethylene glycol is in Julie Jensen's stomach?
No.
Can someone else who would be more qualified do that?
The toxicologist.
And why is the toxicologist able to do that and you are not?
Because I had no training in understanding the levels of micrograms per ml or trying to extrapolate micrograms versus the level of fluid in a stomach.
Okay.
We never do that. I consult with the toxicologist.
Okay, but here's the problem. You told me that there's a large amount of ethylene glycol in the stomach, right?
That's correct.
That's one of the bases for your opinion, right?
That's correct.
And so I'm trying to decide what you say is a large amount. How much total in her stomach would you consider a large amount?
Okay, if we have over 1,000 and we're dealing with less than the bottom rim of a coffee cup or even a spot in a coffee cup, that would be an aliquot. I would say maybe 2 spots in a coffee cup. And you're passing that through a machine. And you're coming up with a level of over 3,400 or 940 micrograms. And that's out of a bottle of 100 ml. I can't tell you the total amount in that bottle of 100 ml. I can't tell you that total amount in 660 mLs in her gastric contents. I just know the very tiny few drops that they place through the machine come up with almost 4,000 micrograms. I cannot tell you to a reasonable degree of medical certainty how much is in her gastric contents in total.
All right. I have this glass of water. Let's assume this is 8 ounces. All right? Okay?
Okay,
If I drink it right now, I'll have 8 ounces of this liquid, or whatever liquid you want, in my gastric contents. True?
not necessarily. You may have something else in there.
Well, I can have other things in my stomach, sure, but this 8 ounces would go in there, right? Let's
Yes.
assume this is ethylene glycol, and I drank this 8 ounces. Then I'd have 8 ounces of ethylene glycol in my stomach, right?
Yes,
And what you're saying is that there's a large amount in the stomach, correct?
yes,
And so you can measure that. It's a quantity that you can measure in the stomach contents. Because if a person only took like something small like a teaspoonful, that wouldn't kill you with ethylene glycol. That's too little amount, right?
that's true. A teaspoon wouldn't.
And so what you're looking for when you're talking about this acute amount, you're talking about something substantial, several ounces in her stomach, correct?
Objection, Your Honor. The witness has repeatedly indicated he does not know what the quantity was of ethylene glycol in the stomach, and he has repeated.
The objection's overruled.
I don't know, as I mentioned before.
Well, but you are relying on it being a large acute ingestion, right? And what is large to you? Is it more than an ounce, more than 2 ounces, more than 4 ounces? What is it?
It's what's detected in the gastric contents. I can't put it towards amounts ingested. I put it towards what it shows up on the gas chromatograph. That's how you determine the amounts. You determine it by that.
Oh, you don't, Dr. Chambliss.
Objection, counsel's arguing with the witness.
Well, you're not allowed to comment, but Doctor, I guess, and this is for my own understanding, are you able to tell us what was the whole volume of liquid or material, let's put it? What was the whole volume volume of matter found in the stomach?
660 ml.
Okay.
Which is a pint, somewhere a couple of pints.
And are you saying that the recipient of the 100 milliliters of material that you sent for examination can say what the volume of ethylene glycol therein would be?
The forensic toxicologist should be able to do that. They take the 100 ml, they take a small aliquot out of that 100 ml, they pass it through the machine, they get a reading of the amount, and from that reading, they extrapolate or try to go back to how much should have been present in that 100 ml.
Well, can they say what percentage
They give a
or what
range.
volume of ethylene glycol was present in the 660 milliliters of material which were found in the stomach?
Some forensic toxicologists will do that, yes,
Okay,
yes.
go ahead and finish.
Dr. Chambliss. You are saying that your opinion is based on there being a large amount in the stomach. And I'm not, what is that amount that you consider large? I mean, it's something that you would have recently drank is what you mean by acute ingestion, right?
Yes,
Like within an hour or something like that is what you're trying to say.
it could be an hour, over the course of an hour, yes.
What's the outside period?
Well, 12 hours.
Okay. And you're saying that she drank some large amount. That's why it's an acute ingestion. True?
Yes,
Okay. And you've already said a teaspoon's not a large amount, but she has 660 milliliters is like 22 ounces, right? More than a soda bottle worth?
yes, yes.
Okay. And so, are you saying it's at least several ounces? That's what makes it an acute ingestion, correct?
It's the amount that's present there, so it's a large amount in her system, yes.
Right. And large amount, you're saying ounces.
If you want to use ounces, we could use ounces, yes.
Okay. And you would say there'd be ounces in her stomach.
There are, yes, ounces in her stomach.
Okay. What's that number you have in front of you, Dr. Chambliss?
For
340 micrograms.
3,940 micrograms.
Okay. And how many grams is that? A microgram.
I don't know.
A microgram is 1/1,000,000th of a gram. Right?
Yes.
Do you know that?
I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know the conversion.
Well, would you accept that there's only a half a teaspoon of ethylene glycol in her stomach, Dr. Chambliss? Not ounces?
That's the aliquot is what we're talking about. We're not talking about everything in that 100 ml. That's just a small sample passed through the machine.
But the sample is 3,940 micrograms per deciliter, right? Is that what it is, deciliter?
Per ml.
Oh, per ml, okay. Per milliliter. And you can convert that if if you have 660 milliliters, that's how much is in the stomach, right? 660 milliliters, right?
Okay,
Isn't that what you told me? That's what you
Yes.
collected?
Yeah.
So you take 660 milliliters, because it's per milliliter. So you multiply 660 times the 3,940 micrograms to get how much total is in that stomach, right? Could you do that calculation for me?
close to 270-something thousand.
Would you do that calculation for me? Do you have a pen and paper?
No, I don't. $394,000 micrograms per ml.
394,000 what?
Micrograms per ml, that's the 100 ml that's present.
No.
If you want to
It's-
call it, and it's 6 times that if you're talking about 660 ml.
All right, so you're saying, say that again. What's
I'm saying in the 100 micrograms per 100 ml that I gave to the toxicologist, and I gave him a small aliquot of that, and he came up with 3,940 micrograms per ml. So just in that bottle I gave him is 394,000 micrograms per ml. And if we take the other 560 ml, you're way over a million.
Right, if you round that up to 400,000 and multiply it by 6, you're at 2,400,000 micrograms, right?
Yes,
And that's a big number?
that's a big number.
Well, a microgram is 1/1,000,000 of a gram, Dr. Chambliss.
I'm just telling you what the toxicologists consider to be a large amount.
What toxicologist is that?
I could pull a book off the shelf. I know Dr. Long personally.
You tell me what book says that 2.4 million micrograms is a large amount.
Basalt, B-A-S-E-L-T.
And we'll ask Dr. Long about that, or I might be able to pull that out. I don't know if I brought that box today.
Objection. Again, counsel's making statements instead of asking questions, Your Honor.
Sustained. Can you lawyers come up for a moment? You've had an eventful day, and I think it's time to take a break. Let me ask that you return tomorrow morning if you're here at 5 minutes to 9. Is that all right for everybody? And in the meantime, please don't talk about the case. Read, watch, or listen to any account of the trial, and enjoy the evening.
Please all rise.